Alright, welcome to the lecture about Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh's story is going to come from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it is the story about how he's going to go seeking immortality. So remember, for the Mesopotamians, they're not going to live for very long. Into their 30s was kind of the lifespan that most people lived, and so it's a harsh climate, a harsh lifestyle, a harsh time period to live in, and so something like immortality is going to be really precious and really important to these people. And it's also something that the gods get, that man does not. And so it's going to be seen as something precious. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh is the earliest hero story that we actually know of. Its origins are probably Sumerian, as most of the tales from Mesopotamia kind of start off in Sumerian times with different names, but then they transform over the years, and generally when we're looking at the text, we're looking at text from the Babylonians or the Assyrians and kind of recreating the story from the cuneiform tablets. Now for Gilgamesh, his goal, his thing he is trying to find, the boon, the elixir he's trying to get in his hero's journey, is to obtain immortality or eternal youth. He's actually not going to obtain this, and so we actually get something a little bit different here in the hero's journey. Gilgamesh actually returns learning a life lesson as opposed to actually gaining the thing he was going on the journey for. So I think that's really interesting that we actually find out something about what man's lot is. Now, if you're interested in actually reading the story, you can go to that link that links you to the Smithsonian, and you'll notice it's heavily repetitious. And that's because it started off as an oral tradition, and it maintained the repetition. And so there's certain sections of this story that just repeat over and over and over again. And for oral traditions, you got to remember that is going to help the person who's telling the story remember what to say, and it's going to help the person who's listening to the story remember what the person who's telling the story has to say. And so there's important reasons why it's in there. It also gives flow and movement and repeats so that people remember the characters or remember certain important parts of the story. And so repetition is always a really important part of a story that starts in oral tradition. Alright, so a little bit about Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a demigod. His mother is a goddess, and so he is considered to be 2/3 god, 1/3 man. And so here is our miraculous birth. So Gilgamesh is considered to be in that kind of realm of the heroes that start off with something really interesting or weird about their conception or their birth. So he is part god, part mortal, and he's the biggest, the best looking, the strongest. He's kind of the top guy. And this really kind of bores him because there's no one who's quite as good as Gilgamesh. There's no one who's quite as smart, quite as handsome, quite as strong, quite as ambitious. So he's kind of like, what do I do with myself? And so he, kind of fritters his time away, you could kind of say, kind of wreaking havoc on the people that he is king over. So it's kind of an interesting setup for the actual story. Now, Gilgamesh himself seems to have been a semi-historical king. So we have this tale about Gilgamesh, who builds the great walls around the city of Uruk, and these massive walls protect the city, and how wonderful he is, and all these great deeds that he does. And so we have this character that Gilgamesh seems to kind of jive with. Now, Uruk itself, this is Ishtar's city. So remember, the gods for the Mesopotamians kind of have their own city. So remember, Marduk is the god, the main god for Babylon. Not that the other gods aren't present, it's just that he is the one who, resides in Babylon. Ishtar resides in Uruk, and so she's going to be part of this story, and an important part of this story. Now, like I told you before, the people of Uruk are a little bit afraid, kind of unknowing about their king. He does things that no one really would think are correct things to do, so he oppresses people. He deflowers all the virgins before their wedding night, and the people see this as harassing, and they just kind of think like, oh my gosh, like we can't live underneath this oppressive king. And so they call up to the gods, praying up to the gods, in particular Anu, god of the sky, to do something about Gilgamesh. They're like, he's bored, he's got nothing better to do with his time, so he's, frittering away his time harassing us because he's got nothing better to do. So the gods create a man called Enkidu, and Enkidu is going to challenge Gilgamesh. Now, Enkidu at first is this wild man. He lives amongst the beasts. He grows up amongst the beasts. He's uncivilized. He's hairy. He is, in a way, also harassing the people, in the sense that since he lives with the beast, if a beast is caught in a trap, he will go and let the animal free. So this is kind of his family. The animals are part of his family, and so he kind of takes care of the animals. But the trackers and the trappers and the hunters see this as a really big problem. This is their livelihood. What are they going to do? Enkidu is messing things up for them. And so the conclusion comes that they're going to take one of the female priestesses of Ishtar from the city of Uruk and have her seduce Enkidu. Now, for Ishtar, part of the practice for Ishtar in her temple was that there were sacred prostitutes. I think as a Western culture, we think of this as very bizarre and very odd that this would be something that they would do. But in order to honor Ishtar, this was important. And so her temple often had this sacred prostitution as part of the rites and rituals for Ishtar. So remember, Ishtar, goddess of sexuality, beauty, war, queen of heaven. So she's majorly important. Remember back to the archetypes. She's one of the major archetypes, great mother goddess, dying goddess. I mean, she's kind of a loaded goddess, right? Like, she does everything. And she also has quite a bit of a temper, which we'll see that come into the story as well. So this female priestess is taken out into the forest. She seduces Enkidu, brings him to the city, and once he comes to the city, once he's seduced by the prostitute, once they have intercourse, the animals reject him. So he can never go home again. He tries to go home. The animals reject him. They won't have anything to do with him, and so really the only option he has is to go back to the city. Now, in going back to the city, he learns that Gilgamesh is doing all these horrible things to his people, and Enkidu has a strong sense of this being very wrong, and so he challenges Gilgamesh. And since he is made to be able to challenge Gilgamesh, this is actually a really good fight, and Gilgamesh, by the end of the fight, actually has a lot of respect for Enkidu, because he's kind of like, someone who actually matches me in strength, and is in a way kind of a mirror, or I don't want to call it a mirror, but a Gilgamesh-like figure. And so he is hairy, but he's handsome, he's strong, he's kind of the perfect BFF for Gilgamesh. And so after this fight, they actually are like BFFs, inseparable. And I just kind of think of how, sometimes two people in our world kind of collide and clash. And at first they kind of hate each other. But once they start to really get to know each other, and maybe it's through conflict, but at the end of the conflict, someone realizes, or they both realize, wow, okay, maybe I didn't like you because you're a little bit too much like me. That's kind of what happens here with Gilgamesh and Enkidu. But Enkidu realizes this is someone I can go do all my adventures with. So he brings Enkidu into the palace, and they are inseparable BFFs from this point on. Now, one of the adventures that they actually go on is to the cedar forest, because Gilgamesh wants to get these huge cedars that were well known during that time, and bring them back to his kingdom. Now, the cedars are protected by the demon Humabub that's been placed there by the gods, and so in killing Humabub, they are actually going to pit themselves against the gods. And now with Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is advocated for by Shamash, the sun god, and so Sun gods generally have something to do with law, justice, and things like that. So Gilgamesh actually has someone who's advocating on his side pretty well. And so they go on this adventure, they kill the demon Hamabub, they get the cedar, they come back to the city. The gods are not happy about this. Samash, though, kind of calms the gods down. And the other thing is Ishtar, after seeing Gilgamesh destroy the demon Hamabub, kind of is like, hey, like impressed with him and wants to seduce him. But Gilgamesh is very aware of Ishtar's past. Now remember back to her great mother goddess story. She's gotten all these powers. She then gets married. We go on to the dying god story. She goes into the underworld. She is killed, then revived, but has to find someone to replace her in the underworld so that she can come back to the above world. Remember, she sends her husband, Tamuzi, into the underworld in her place. So he knows about this story. He knows about several other of her lovers. And Gilgamesh is just like, I don't think so. You're a little off kilter. You're a little crazy. I know you have a tendency to destroy your past lovers. And so Gilgamesh rejects Ishtar. Now, think of a goddess and think of how we as people react to the rejection of someone that we are really into. And then think about how maybe Ishtar responds to this. It's like the human personality blown up 20,000 times. So not only is she absolutely mortified and hurt that he would reject her and a little bit embarrassed, but she's also, yes, a little crazy. And so she decides to go up to the heavens and ask for the Bull of Heaven. And the Bull of Heaven is supposed to be sent down to Earth to destroy Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Now, it has been suggested by some scholars that the Bull of Heaven is supposed to refer to something like famine upon the land, but here it's represented as this actual animal, this symbolic Bull of Heaven. And so this is sent down to the Earth and rages around, to which, of course, Enkidu and Gilgamesh decide they're going to have to destroy the Bull of Heaven in order to save the people. And so they kill the Bull of Heaven. Now, not only are the gods unhappy about this, but Enkidu decides to do a little insult to injury. He rips off the leg of the Bull of Heaven, swings it around, and chucks it at Ishtar, barely missing her. And of course, I just imagine her being like, I can't believe the nerve of these guys. And so not only is Ishtar upset, but then all the other gods are upset because the Bull of Heaven has been killed. And they decide that the combined strength of Gilgamesh and Enkidu is too much, and so one of them is going to have to die. And so it's going to be Enkidu that's going to get sick and kind of curse everything that's happened to him, really. And Enkidu's generally a fairly likable character up until this point, but it's really kind of almost this depressive state that we get Enkidu in, and this is going to be part of what kind of changes Gilgamesh. Really meeting Enkidu is going to be the first step in changing Gilgamesh. Seeing his friend suffer is going to change Gilgamesh. And then when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh wants to go on his journey to find immortality. And so bit by bit, we're going to get Gilgamesh kind of seeing the light a little bit and changing. Now, Enkidu will die. Gilgamesh will go on the journey to try and find Upnipishtim. So if you remember Upnipishtim, this is our hero from the flood section who gains immortality because he survives the floods and then gives the sacrifice up to the gods, and the gods grant him and his wife immortality. And so Gilgamesh feels like if he can find Upnipishtim, he can find out how to thwart death, and he can get immortality for himself. Now, this is quite the journey he's going to undertake in order to find this, because Upnipishtim doesn't really live within our realm. He's in kind of this special realm. And so Gilgamesh really is undertaking this massive journey. And he becomes very haggard during the journey. Whenever anyone meets him, they kind of look at him like, oh my gosh, why do you look so bad? You look rugged and worn and horrible. Which, of course, when you're feeling down and out is exactly what you want to hear someone say to you, right? And Gilgamesh answers them, I am worn out. I am a man who's been on this journey, and my friend, he died, and I now fear death, and I held on to his body because I wanted him to come back to me, and I felt like I could bring him back, and I only let him go when the worms started to fall out of his nose, which is truly disgusting. And probably a good time to let go of your friend. But he is and does take this journey very seriously. And so part of the journey is going through the Mushu Mountains, where the sun god will pass through. And in this portion of the journey, he will battle the lions. Now, this becomes something that is very particular to the culture of the Mesopotamians, because if you go and you look at Mesopotamian artwork, you're actually going to find that there are scenes of kings battling lions. And it's highly prescribed. They're absolutely beautiful scenes, but basically a large slaughter of lions. And so the kings are trying to kind of harken back, and so we kind of think they're trying to establish their power through these lion hunts, just like what we see with Gilgamesh. And it's Gilgamesh who basically takes on a pride of lions himself and destroys them all. And so we get this connection between the kings of Mesopotamia and Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh is going to meet the Threshold Guardians, and he's going to meet the Threshold Guardians like the Scorpion Man and the Scorpion Woman. And in this portion of the story, they will recognize that he is part god, and they will question what is he doing and why is he going on this quest. He has to convince them that he is worthy of actually crossing through the mountain pass that is reserved for Shamash. And he does convince them, and so they let him go through, but they give him a warning. This is a passage that will take a very long time. It's not easy, it's going to be difficult, and that's exactly what Gilgamesh finds. Is he's going through all the different leagues, and it's dark, and it's black, and you get some of the repetition here. The repetition in this portion of the story really does emphasize, the lengthiness and the futility of this portion of the story. And so he finally does make it through to the other side of the mountain, almost in despair. But by passing through here, he's proven that he is worthy, and he has the resolve, and he's got the strength to do this mission. The first person he runs into is going to be the sun god Shamash. And Shamash does ask him, what has happened to you? You look like hell, basically, is what Shamash kind of says to him. And Shamash challenges Gilgamesh on what he's actually trying to accomplish, and tells him, you will not be able to accomplish what you want. You should just turn around. You should give up on your quest. But Gilgamesh is very stubborn. He refuses to give up on his quest and continues on. And then he meets Sidori, who's one of the barmaids, and he's in the Garden of the Gods by now, so he's crossed over definitely into a special world. He's no longer in kind of the normal world. And so Sidori actually sees him coming from afar and is like, oh my gosh, this guy looks crazy. So she closes the door to her bar and tries to kind of lock the door, and Gilgamesh actually gets offended by this and tries to smash open the door. And Sidori is kind of looking like maybe he is crazy. And she asks him and tells him, hey, you look like hell. And he's like, yes, I know, everyone keeps telling me that. Actually, he doesn't say that, but I add that in. And he goes through the whole story again about his friend and how he died and how he's on a quest for immortality. And Sidori says, you might as well give up now. You will not obtain the goal for which you are searching, and let me tell you why. And she gives him a little bit of the philosophy of the human life, which I think was probably pretty important to the Mesopotamians at this point, because they need to know, why do we live for so short, and why only the gods have immortality? And so she says, the philosophy for human life is you should enjoy the life you have. You should put your arm around the woman you love. You should hold the hand of the small child or the small children around you, for they're your immortality. They will continue on. So the lot of man is to die. It's not to have immortality, and so you should give up on this crazy goal. But of course, Gilgamesh, being stubborn, will not do that, and he forces her to tell him how to find Utnapishtim. And so she tells him that he needs to go find the ferryman who can take him across the waters of death. So he goes on to find the ferryman who can take him across, and this is the ferryman for the sun. So basically he's having to make the journey of the sun. He's going over the waters of death, which is the journey that the sun makes, with the ferryman or Shamabad. And in this, we are a little confused because there's a portion of the text that seems to be a little bit rough and not very clear, and it seems like Gilgamesh in his anger actually destroys the boat that's necessary to take him across the waters. So the ferryman's kind of like, oh, okay, you need to calm yourself down because you just destroyed the boat that we need to take you across the waters, which is the goal that you want. So here's how to rebuild it. And so Gilgamesh has to rebuild this boat. He destroys the stones that are necessary to get him across. Sometimes you kind of look at Gilgamesh and you kind of think you're a little bit of a mess, son. Get it together. But I think the stress of the things he's going through can sometimes cause this in people, to be a little bit wound a little too tight after something traumatic has happened. But he does make it over the waters of death. And when he makes it over the waters of death, he is welcomed by Utnapishtim. But Utnapishtim is also kind of keeping Gilgamesh a little bit of arm's distance. He's kind of like, what are you doing, and why are you here, and, why are you making this journey? Gilgamesh goes through his whole spiel again about Enkidu and what he's doing, and yes, he knows he doesn't look so good. And Utnapishtim is then asked, hey, Utnapishtim, I've made this journey. I came to find out how you gained immortality. Could you tell me? And so the flood story we looked at when we did the 4 flood stories, the comparison, is this flood story that Utnapishtim has gone on. So recall that story, place it in here. I'm not going to go back over the story again, but he tells them that's how I gain immortality. I did a heroic deed, the gods blessed me, and he kind of asks Gilgamesh, well, what have you done that is worthy of gaining immortality from the gods? And Gilgamesh doesn't have a good enough answer. And so Utnapishtim says, okay, I'll give you a challenge, and he says, okay, maybe if you stay up 7 days and 7 nights, you will be worthy of gaining immortality. And Gilgamesh really thinks he is staying up 7 days and 7 nights, but he keeps falling asleep. And so Utnapishtim's wife bakes a loaf of bread every night and puts it next to him every time he falls asleep. And so Utnapishtim goes to Gilgamesh on the last day, and Gilgamesh is kind of like, see, I told you I could do it. And he's like, yeah, not so much. See all those bricks of bread? Those were baked every time you fell asleep. So, yeah, no, you're not so worthy of gaining something like immortality. So he totally fails, and Utnapishtim is really ready to kind of send Gilgamesh away on his, on his own, and he pleads with Utnapishtim's wife, please, there's got to be something else I can do, some other way I can earn immortality, please, have Utnapishtim tell me something. And so Utnapishtim finally says, okay, there's one other way. There's a plant at the bottom of the ocean, and if you get this plant and you eat it, this will give you what you're looking for. And so Gilgamesh takes this very seriously and finds the plant on the bottom of the ocean, and he decides to take it home to the city of Uruk. So he's making the journey back home. He's very excited that he almost has obtained what he was searching for, and he falls asleep one night with the plant near him. And the problem is a serpent comes into the camp, and the serpent finds the plant and eats the plant, which is why the Mesopotamians kind of were able to explain snakes shedding their skin. It was because they ate this plant, and so they could shed their skin and renew themselves. So the snake eats the plant. Utnapishtim wakes up to find out his goal is smashed again. He will not obtain everything he's journeyed for. And so it's really kind of in the end moments that all these events that have happened and all these things that Gilgamesh has gone through kind of makes him realize that Siduri was actually right. And so he learns that you cannot gain immortality. Youth will slip through your fingers. And to live the life of a man and to, really take hold of that philosophy. Put your arm around your loved ones, hold the hand of a small child, and in this you will gain a certain amount of immortality. And the life of a man is for the life of a man. You cannot have what the gods have. And so you shouldn't be striving for the things that are unattainable. Try and focus on the things that are important, that are right in front of you, and gain your immortality through your good deeds, through your family, and through your loved ones. And so, in the end, Sidori, the barmaid's philosophy of life wins out, and Gilgamesh realizes he will grow old and he will die, but he's now come to grips with this, so to say.